The Draxus Dominion had never met resistance that truly challenged their might. Across the galaxy, their name was whispered in fear, the very mention of it enough to send entire civilizations into hiding or submission. Their empire spanned dozens of star systems, each conquered with ruthless efficiency and precision, as they crushed any species that dared oppose them. Their fleets were vast, and their weapons devastating, capable of turning entire planets into cinders with a single command. To the Draxus, power was an instinct, and their rule was absolute. No one had ever dared to question their dominance. That is, until Earth became their next target. The Draxus had been watching the human race for decades, observing from afar, amused at their primitive technology and what they perceived as childish squabbles. Humanity was still clinging to its fractured governments and primitive weapons, barely scratching the surface of space exploration. The Draxus had no interest in such a world, until they realized that Earth was rich in a resource the Dominion desperately needed. A planet so insignificant, yet holding the key to securing their continued reign. In the halls of the Draxus War Command, High Lord Valgar stood before a massive holomap of the galaxy. His jagged armor gleamed with blood-red accents, the gleam reflecting the many campaigns that had led to his rise. His eyes, cold as ice, scanned the star systems with detached precision. Earth was one of many, but it had to be conquered. As was tradition, a few hundred of his warships were dispatched with little more than a passing thought. Humans would fall without a fight. At least, that was what Valgar thought. On the other side of the universe, Commander Jack Reaper Kane was preparing for a mission that most people would call impossible. A decorated Navy SEAL with over a decade of combat experience, Kane had never backed down from a challenge. He had been through hell and back more times than he cared to count, and every mission had honed him into a weapon in his own right. He had faced insurmountable odds before, terrorist organizations, rogue states, even alien invaders. But nothing in his career could have prepared him for the situation Earth now found itself in. The United Terran Federation, UTF, had received intelligence reports confirming the Draxus intentions. They knew the Dominion's fleet was already on its way, and they were vastly outmatched. But humanity wasn't without hope. It had only one advantage: the human will to survive. And Kane was the perfect embodiment of that will. Sitting in a darkened briefing room, Kane stared at the holographic map of Earth and the incoming Draxus fleet. His jaw clenched, his gaze fixed. "So, this is what we're up against," he muttered under his breath. The mission was simple: infiltrate one of the Draxus warships, gather intel on their plans, and sabotage their operations. If the human race stood a chance, this mission had to succeed. There would be no reinforcements, no second chances. If they failed, Earth would be lost. Kane's team consisted of a select few veterans with years of experience in covert operations. They were the best of the best. Together, they would breach the Draxus ship, disable its weapon systems, and sabotage their communications. It was the perfect mission for a man who lived and breathed danger. But the Draxus had no concept of such a threat from a species they viewed as beneath them. The day of the mission arrived with a biting chill in the air. Kane and his team were transported aboard a classified stealth vessel, designed to remain undetected by the Draxus fleet. The ship's hull absorbed energy, masking its presence from enemy radar. As they traveled through space at near light speed, Kane's mind raced with scenarios. What if the ship was detected? What if they were caught before they could even land on the Draxus vessel? But there was no room for doubt, not in his line of work. His only focus was the task at hand. Upon arrival, Kane's team made their descent into the heart of the Draxus warship, a massive behemoth that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. The sheer scale of the ship was intimidating. Towers of gleaming metal rose from the core of the vessel, housing untold numbers of Draxus soldiers, machines, and supplies. But there was no time for awe. Kane moved with purpose, a silent shadow leading his team through the ship's labyrinthine corridors, their footsteps muffled by the thick, reinforced flooring. The Draxus had expected a swift conquest, but Kane had other plans. His mind worked as quickly as his body, calculating every move, analyzing every sound. They encountered their first Draxus guards in the lower levels of the ship, massive creatures, genetically enhanced for war, their bodies armored and bristling with weaponry. These were no ordinary soldiers. They were engineered to be perfect killing machines. But Kane wasn't intimidated. He never was. His team engaged the guards with lethal efficiency. The humans didn't have the same size or strength, but they had something far more dangerous: tactics. With well-placed explosives and coordinated attacks, they neutralized the guards before they even had a chance to react. The Draxus had never faced opponents like this, humans who fought with the cunning of cornered predators. Kane's mission had quickly escalated from reconnaissance to sabotage. As they pressed deeper into the ship, the resistance grew more intense. The Draxus were scrambling to contain the threat, but Kane was always one step ahead. He exploited their overconfidence, luring them into traps they didn't see coming. Every action was deliberate, every movement calculated for maximum impact. The deeper they went, the more Kane began to realize just how vast the Draxus Empire truly was. Their war machines were unlike anything humanity had encountered. Yet even as the odds against them grew, Kane remained steadfast. If he and his team could strike the heart of the Draxus war machine, maybe, just maybe, they could buy Earth the time it needed to mount a defense. It wasn't just about stopping the invasion anymore. It was about sending a message. The Draxus had underestimated humanity, and Kane would ensure they would regret that mistake. As the ship's systems started to fail, alarms blaring in every corridor, Kane knew they had only moments before the Draxus reacted in full force. His team was scattered across the ship, preparing the final detonations. With each step, Kane felt the weight of their mission pressing down on him, but his resolve hardened. They would succeed, or they would die trying. The warlord Valgar would soon understand that the human race was not one to be conquered, and Kane would make sure of it. The Draxus warship groaned under the weight of its failing systems as explosions rocked its core. Kane's mind raced as he navigated the darkened corridors, his heart pounding, every instinct alert. The ship was already on the brink of collapse. The sabotage had worked. He could hear the panicked shouts of Draxus soldiers echoing through the metallic halls, their once imposing confidence shattered by the chaos they hadn't anticipated. "Move out," Kane barked to his team, his voice cold and precise. "We're not done yet." His words echoed in the tense silence as his squad pressed forward, shadows in the belly of the beast. They had destroyed the ship's outer defenses, compromised its weapons, and scattered the Draxus ranks. Yet, the hardest part was still ahead. The bridge, the heart of the ship. If they could cripple the command center, the Draxus would be forced into retreat. Kane's grip tightened around his rifle. But it wasn't just the mission at hand that weighed on him. It was the unmistakable sense of growing danger, something darker than he had anticipated. As they moved through the corridors, the silence between them grew thick with the realization that they were not alone. The Draxus were adapting, organizing their counterattack. They had learned fast. A series of loud thuds echoed in the distance, followed by the mechanical hum of Draxus battle droids charging in their direction. Kane's tactical mind went to work, already calculating his next move. "Split up. Move in pairs. Take them down fast," Kane ordered. His team responded without hesitation. They were trained for moments like this, split-second decisions, tactical precision. Kane and Sergeant Hawkins took the left flank, while Corporal Lee and Specialist Ray covered the rear. Kane's eyes narrowed as he moved, every sense heightened. The Draxus were powerful, but they had never encountered human unpredictability, the kind that turned the tides of impossible battles. A flash of motion caught Kane's attention. One of the battle droids emerged from the shadows, its hulking form outlined against the dim emergency lighting. The droid's crimson eyes locked onto Kane, And in that moment, there was no doubt. The fight had only just begun. Kane's first move was instinctual. He dove into a roll, narrowly dodging the droid's blast, and fired a precise shot into its vulnerable joints. The droid jerked, its weapon malfunctioning, but it wasn't enough. A second droid appeared, and then another, until they were surrounded. Hawkins opened fire, cutting down one droid with a burst of automatic fire. Lee and Ray flanked from the opposite side, providing the necessary cover. The room became a cacophony of gunfire and clashing metal as the humans fought with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Kane moved with fluidity, each action deliberate and efficient. Yet, despite their expertise, the Draxus war machines were not easily defeated. The droids adapted, recalibrating their tactics in real time. Their overwhelming strength, reinforced armor, and advanced weaponry kept the humans on the defensive, forcing them to retreat deeper into the ship's interior. Kane's jaw clenched as he ducked behind cover. The sheer scale of the Draxus force was starting to set in, but there was no time to second-guess. He had a mission. They had to make it to the bridge, no matter the cost. Ray Lee, cover the rear, Kane ordered, his voice sharp. Hawkins and I are pushing forward. The sound of heavy footsteps reverberated through the steel walls, growing louder. Kane knew that the Draxus had regrouped. This was their last stand. There was no room for error. His breath steady, Kane scanned his environment. They were almost there. Just one more corridor, one more set of locked doors. The bridge was close. Suddenly, a low rumble filled the air, and the lights flickered out. Darkness enveloped them. The faint glow of emergency lights cast eerie shadows across the narrow passageway. Kane's heart rate remained steady as he listened carefully. Something wasn't right. The Draxus were moving too quietly. Before he could react, the doors ahead of them slammed open. In the doorway stood High Lord Valgar, flanked by his personal guard, a cadre of genetically enhanced Draxus warriors. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were the very elite of the Draxus military, stronger, faster, and more ruthless than anything the humans had encountered. Valgar's tall, menacing figure loomed over them, his armored form gleaming in the dim light. His glowing eyes fixed on Kane, narrowing with contempt. "So, this is the great human hero," he sneered, his voice a deep growl. "The one who thinks he can challenge the might of the Draxus." Kane stood tall, his eyes unflinching. The room was tense, the weight of their confrontation heavy in the air. He could feel his pulse quicken, but he didn't flinch. "I'm not here to talk," he said, his voice cold and confident. "I'm here to finish this." Valgar's laughter echoed through the hallway. "Finish it? You're outnumbered, human. You think you can stop us with your primitive weapons? We are beyond your comprehension. You are nothing more than an insect beneath my boot." With a guttural command, Valgar's warriors surged forward, their footsteps pounding like thunder against the metal floor. Kane's eyes flicked to Hawkins, who was already setting up a defensive perimeter. The battle was about to reach its crescendo. Kane's mind raced through his options. There was no room for mistakes. He could fight these soldiers, but the true enemy was Valgar himself. A straight confrontation with the Draxus warlord would be suicide without a plan. But Kane was no ordinary soldier. He was a master of tactics, a survivor in the most impossible situations. He had learned long ago that brute strength alone was never enough to win a war. He gave a quick nod to Hawkins, signaling the beginning of the endgame. In a split second, he dropped to the ground, rolling into cover, narrowly avoiding the blast from one of Valgar's guards. The firefight erupted once again, but Kane was already moving, closing the distance with the warlord. This was it. Kane's mind was a razor-sharp edge, every movement deliberate, every breath calculated. The Draxus had underestimated humanity's will to survive. They had never faced a force like him, and Valgar would soon learn that the human spirit, once unleashed, was unstoppable. The explosion rocked the Draxus warship, its violent force throwing Kane against the cold, metallic wall. For a moment, the world blurred around him, disorienting and chaotic. He shook his head, clearing the fog that clouded his vision, and staggered to his feet. Sparks crackled from exposed wires, and the ship's emergency lighting flickered, casting an eerie glow on the wreckage. His ears rang, but there was no time to waste. The mission wasn't over yet. "Hawkins," Kane shouted, his voice hoarse but steady. "Status report." "Clear." Hawkins' voice came back, calm and professional as ever. "The charges are set. We've done our part. Now we get out." The plan had been simple. Breach the Draxus flagship, gather intelligence, destroy its command center, and escape. The first two had gone without a hitch, but the final part was always the most dangerous. The warship was dying, its systems failing, but there was still a chance it could destroy Earth before the Draxus retreated. They needed to ensure the ship's destruction was final. No Draxus ship ever returned from a failed mission, and this one would be no different. Kane took a deep breath, steadying himself. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him, on all of them. The Draxus were no longer just enemies. They were a force that threatened the survival of humanity. And now a single human squad had crippled them. The escape route was mapped out, an old ventilation shaft that led to the rear docking bay, where a shuttle would be waiting to take them back to the UTF fleet. Kane could see the team moving ahead, navigating the crumbling ship with practiced ease. His eyes scanned the smoke-filled corridor ahead of him. The ship's destruction was imminent, but there was still the matter of the Draxus counterattack. He could hear their footsteps now, growing louder by the second. "Hawkins, Lee, take point. Get to the shuttle," Kane commanded, his tone resolute. As the team moved ahead, Kane stayed behind, eyes fixed on the approaching danger. The Draxus were regrouping, their superior technology and sheer numbers making them formidable opponents. But Kane had learned something crucial during the fight. The Draxus might have the power, but humans had something else, the ability to adapt and overcome. No amount of armor or weaponry could protect against that. Just as he turned to follow his team, a loud roar echoed from the depths of the ship. Kane froze, the sound unmistakable. Valgar, the Draxus warlord, had survived, and now he was coming for them, filled with an anger that could not be contained. Kane's hand tightened around his weapon. He had known this was coming. Valgar wasn't just a warlord. He was a symbol of Draxus pride, an embodiment of their arrogance. Losing to a human was something the Draxus would never accept. The warlord's rage would be a force unlike anything Kane had faced before. "We can't outrun him," Kane muttered to himself, the grim reality of the situation setting in. They needed to finish what they started. They couldn't let Valgar escape, or Earth would be in even greater danger. Ahead, the rest of the team was already on the move, but Kane's instincts told him that he couldn't risk leaving the ship before taking down the Draxus leader. Not after all they had sacrificed. He turned and sprinted toward the sound of Valgar's footsteps. As he neared the warlord, Kane's heart rate quickened. The Draxus was taller than he remembered, a hulking mass of armored muscle, his face twisted into a permanent sneer. His eyes glowed with cold fury, a reminder of the arrogance that had led the Draxus to underestimate humanity. Valgar's soldiers had fallen, but the warlord was still a threat, a terrifying one. Kane didn't hesitate. He had no illusions about what this would be. He was one man against a monster, but he had faced impossible odds before. This time, he had something the Draxus lacked: resolve. Valgar's roar reverberated through the corridor as he charged. Kane dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the warlord's massive blade as it cleaved through the air. He fired at Valgar's exposed joints, the rounds bouncing off the heavy armor. The Draxus warlord grinned, his strength a mocking contrast to Kane's efforts. But Kane wasn't here to win through strength alone. He was here to outsmart him. Kane ducked behind a column as Valgar's blade sliced through the air again, narrowly missing him. The Warlord was powerful, but Kane was faster, using the ship's decaying structure to his advantage. He darted into an alcove and pressed a button on his wrist communicator, activating the last set of explosives, set to detonate at the heart of the ship. The clock was ticking. "You're running out of time, human," Valgar's voice boomed, mocking Kane's every move. "Even if you kill me, it won't stop the inevitable." "You are nothing." Kane's lips curled into a cold smile. "I'm not here to stop the inevitable. I'm here to make sure it's your end, not ours." With that, he launched himself from his cover, using the ship's metal framework to swing onto a higher level, just out of Valgar's reach. The Warlord followed, his heavy steps shaking the floor beneath them. Kane leapt again, landing on a narrow bridge just above the main reactor core. Valgar's eyes followed his every move, but Kane was already moving. He knew exactly where to strike. As Valgar's blade came down, Kane lunged, dodging to the side and using the Warlord's momentum against him. In one swift motion, Kane drove a blade into the exposed part of Valgar's chest, the gap in his armor. Valgar's roar of pain echoed through the ship, but the Draxus Warlord didn't collapse. Instead, he swiped at Kane, his movements wild with rage. The blow sent Kane crashing into the reactor console, the world spinning as the ship began to shake more violently. But Kane's mission was clear. He grabbed the detonator from his belt and pressed the final button. The warship exploded in a cataclysmic burst of light, its core imploding under the force of the human sabotage. The shockwave sent Kane flying, but he gripped onto a shattered piece of metal, struggling to stay conscious. As the warship crumbled, Kane knew the Draxus had been dealt a heavy blow, but this battle was far from over. Valgar was dead, but the Warlords had other ships, other plans. The true war had only just begun, and humanity, against all odds, had proven it could stand its ground. With a final look at the destroyed wreckage, Kane activated the escape shuttle, his eyes steely with resolve. The message was clear: Earth was not to be underestimated. The Warlords would learn that soon enough.